Can we talk?
Hi everyone, my name is MadMatt Lugos and welcome to a discussion video about all my ideas, theories and possibilities for a potential sequel to The Witcher 3. So I'll just clarify, this is just a video about all my different ideas and theories. It's not based on any insider information or confirmation I've heard about a Witcher sequel. As far as I know, Projekt Red haven't confirmed that there'll be a sequel. They've been very vague about anything, and they've tended to just say that the trilogy's finished and they don't really know, or they haven't said explicitly where they're going to go next in this world. So, like a lot of people, I imagine, The Witcher 3 it's my favourite game of all time. I love the games, I've read all the books, and I experienced the game as an adult. I don't necessarily have any nostalgia attached to it like I do with a lot of games from my childhood. It's just has something about it. It has lots of things I can explain, but it also has lots of things that I can't explain that make it such a special game to me. So it goes without saying, for a video discussing potential sequels, that this is going to likely contain spoilers to everything from the games and some stuff from the books as well. I'm not going from an exact script, so I don't necessarily know what I might spoil, but yeah, there'll be spoilers, so I doubt you'll be watching this if you haven't played the games through already anyway. But every time I play through The Witcher 3, it's such an amazing experience, but every time I get to the end of Blood and Wine and we're in that scene with Regis in the graveyard and we're reminiscing and and Geralt's putting his little full stop, his little conclusion on his story, on the trilogy of games, I have this sort of hollow feeling inside where just that horrible feeling of, it's over, it's finished, we're not going to get any more. And then after I sort of get over that, I start hypothesizing about where could they possibly go next with this series. So what I wanted to do in this video was just discuss all the options really that CD Projekt have open to them in making a Witcher 4 or whatever they might want to call the next game. So this video I'm going to split it into three or four sections. So the first section I'm going to discuss a sequel that would have us playing as Geralt, so a Geralt sequel, a Garrett Led Sequel, and then the next section I'm going to discuss what our possibilities would be for a player created character sequel where we probably create our own Witcher with the lessons that CD Projekt has probably learned from making Cyberpunk over the past however many years they've been at it now. What is it, like 6 years they've been making it now? The lessons they'll have learned from that in terms of making a player created character game, and then the other kind of sequel I'll discuss is a canon character sequel, so where we would play as an established character in the world who isn't Geralt. And the last thing I might just want to discuss is just where a sequel could take place, because if you've ever had a look, or if you have any knowledge of the continent, as it's called, I suppose, in Sapkowski's books, there are so many locations. The games have only really scratched the surface in terms of the locales, so I just wanted to talk about where I'd like to see them go, different places that would be interesting. So first up, we're going to talk about a potential sequel where our lead protagonist will be Geralt again. So they have two options, I suppose, where you could have a sequel that takes place after the events of The Witcher 3 where we play as Geralt, or we could have a prequel, like an origin story. It would be a horrible way of putting it, but that is kind of what it would be, a prequel where we play as Geralt as well. So while CD Projekt have been quite clear that the White Wolf story has come to an end, I do think there are possibilities for a sequel as Geralt. It would just need to involve a storyline that would be worth going back to the character after having such an epic and personal storyline where you were fighting the Wild Hunt and helping Ciri fulfill her destiny. So when I was thinking of what could possibly be a big enough through line to bring Geralt back in a sequel, you know, for me, I would happily go back and play as Geralt as just as a wandering Witcher. You know, going from monster contracts similar to the monster contract we dealt with in Toussaint, that was, you know, a very big story, but it was essentially a Witcher's story where it was about dealing with a monster, dealing with a mystery. I would happily go back and just go around doing quests like that, but I suspect if they were going to create a sequel, they'd need a more overarching, bigger story to go back to revisit the character like this. And the one thing that I thought that would be worth playing as Geralt again would be the re-establishing of the Witcher trade. So by the end of everything in The Witcher 3, there really are no other, there aren't any Witcher schools left. They've all been, you know, either destroyed by bandits or armies that have passed through, or they've just faded into insignificance, with the last school that was left being the Wolf School at Kaer Morhen, which wasn't even training witches anymore. It was just the keep was left. And as we see in the events of The Witcher 3, you know, it gets you know, the old eldest Witcher there gets killed in Vesemir. Shout out to Uncle Vesemir. And you know, the place is in ruins. Lambert and Eskel say they're not going to winter there anymore. So that was really the last keep of witches that was left. So there's no other places left. We do get confirmation of the demise of the Viper School and the Cat School through various bits of lore and information in the story across the games. I'm not sure necessarily about the demise of the other schools, but you know, you're always reading stories about the deaths of witches from the Bear School, the Griffin School, the Manticore School, and so on. So you know, witches aren't being trained anymore. So a storyline that would be big enough to bring Geralt back would be if Geralt needed to re-establish the Witcher in trade through the creation or re-establishing of the Witcher schools. So what would happen that would need witches to come back again? And the simple answer is there would need to be more monsters. So maybe there could be another conjunction, similar to what happened at the end of The Witcher 3 when Ciri was in the tower going to fight the White Frost, and monsters were coming through all those portals on Unvik in Skellige. Maybe that could have triggered similar incidents across the continent, and the leaders of all the empires on the continent would be faced with the challenge of monsters ravaging their trade routes, ravaging their towns, their citizens. And they need to do something about it. So maybe the start of the game would see the leaders of the countries and the empires on the continent meeting up to discuss this problem of the monsters, and they'd come to the conclusion that they need more witches, and that's when they would seek the help of the best known witcher in the land, the White Wolf himself, Geralt of Rivia. So then they'd send for Geralt, and they'd bring him and explain to him the situation. And then maybe the Geralt's quest here could be sort of split into sort of two areas. Maybe him and Yennefer would need to create a better trial of the grasses. So a more efficient trial of the grasses, because as it stands, only 3 out of 10 boys survive the trial. So maybe Geralt and Yennefer could set about making, you know, a trial of the grasses with a better mortality rate. So maybe they couldn't make it perfect, so you could just instantly transform anyone into a witcher, but maybe they could improve it to maybe 6 or 7 out of 10 boys who go through the trial of the grasses survive, so that it seems like a more viable method of training witches. So that could be one aspect of the story. The other aspect of the story, Geralt might need to find witches from the other schools. Maybe there could be rumours of elderly witches similar to Vesemir, who represented the other schools, who trained witches before in all the other schools, and Geralt would need to find these witches who would maybe be in hiding after their schools had been destroyed or knocked down. So yeah, in terms of a Garrett led sequel, I mean, that was my main idea. I couldn't really think of any other sort of really big arching story that Geralt would need to come back to. And I think what would be bigger than, you know, saving his daughter and all that would be saving his guild, essentially, and you know, making sure that him and his brothers don't go extinct. And that could be his ultimate parting gift, would be to re-establish the witchering trade and bring honour back to the witches. So that was my idea for a Geralt-led like sequel. You know, do you have any ideas for how Geralt might come back? Do you have any sort of story threads that you think could be picked up? I couldn't really think of anything else. Maybe something to do with race wars, or the Scoia'tael might be enough to bring him back. Another war with the elves and the dwarves, maybe something like that. But I don't know if that would be big enough really to warrant another game played as Geralt. So the other option that's really open to CD Projekt, and I think this is probably a more creatively, at least for them as developers and writers, would be a Geralt-led prequel. So we learn in The Witcher 3, you know, Vesemir says, you know, you're nearly a century old yourself, and the youngest Geralt, that would mean that the youngest Geralt is in the books. So it would be around 60 to 70, I think. I can't remember what the year is at the start of in the first book, but yeah, the youngest in the books, Geralt, you know, he's past 50 basically. So that would mean that they could go back and tell the stories of young Geralt, a Geralt in his 20s maybe, a Geralt who's not met any of the characters from the books, and it would really give them a blank slate to write a story about Geralt, you know, finding his way in the world and meeting a whole cast of characters, falling in love with a whole different chorus of women, you know, who they could write themselves. And you know, the CD Projekt have proven that they can write their own characters really well. You know, Iorveth from The Witcher 2 was one of probably my favourite side character from the series. You know, the heartache of him not being in The Witcher 3 was real for me. You know, I really wanted him in the game. So they proved that they can write important, meaningful characters that weren't already established in the books. So, you know, they really have all options open to them in terms of doing a Geralt-led prequel. You know, we could see the adventures of him with Eskel when they were young witches. They are best friends after all and trained at the school together. And, you know, we get to see a world where witches were more common, where witches were still being trained regularly and were all throughout the continent. And it would give the writers at CD Projekt Red an opportunity to, you know, I know that they've said that they've been a bit tired of doing this sort of setting, but you know, this would really give them a blank slate. They have the map and the world, and there's plenty of history scattered throughout the books about what's happened in the past. But in terms of Geralt himself, they could really flesh him out, and not that he isn't fleshed out already. I just mean they could go back and just create a whole new story for Geralt, that, you know, with a whole cast of supporting characters that we've never met before, and that, you know, that would really excite me. You know, as much as I enjoy seeing all the other characters again, and I would enjoy seeing them again in a sequel, it would be nice to have this storyline of Geralt, you know, separated from his fate and destiny to do with Ciri. So yeah, that was my other idea for a Geralt-led Witcher 4. You know, the prequel has lots of options open to them. You know, let me know what you think. Would you like to see young Geralt, or Geralt in his 20s or 30s, you know, learning his trade? Maybe he'd be a bit more agile, maybe he'd be a bit more reckless, maybe they could alter his personality slightly, maybe he wouldn't be as mature, maybe he'd be a bit more, not emotional, because witches aren't emotional necessarily, but maybe he'd be a bit more reckless or make mistakes, or he wouldn't be as good of a judge of character as he is in his elder years. So considering CD Projekt Red have said, you know, that Geralt's story is over, that means that if they want to go back to telling another Witcher story, then they might lean towards having a player created Witcher. So again, this could be a sequel or a prequel. What I'd like to, I mean, if you were going to do a sequel, it would be difficult to do a player-created character just because the Witcher schools don't exist anymore. So maybe, if, like I said, for the Garrett Led Sequel, maybe that could just be the introduction to the player-created sequel, where Geralt and Yennefer re-established the Witcher in trade, they recreated the Trial of Grasses, and the schools prospered again. And then maybe we move 50 to 100 years in the future, and the Witcher schools are re-established, they're producing witches again, and then we would get to create our own Witcher, and then we could choose to start at one of the schools. You know, we could choose to start at the Cat School, the Viper School, any of the other schools, and create our own character. And maybe each school would be a certain character build. You know, maybe the more nimble light attacks would be from the Cat School. Maybe the more, you know, able to use poisons and oils and bombs would be at the Viper School. Maybe the more defensive heavy build witches, you'd have to start at the Bear School. Maybe the more magic based witches who develop signs even further, they'd start at the Griffin School. Maybe the more well balanced witches would start at the Wolf School. So, you know, maybe they could work that into the gameplay. And I suppose the same would go for a player created character prequel. You know, maybe if they wanted to go back to before the time of Geralt, and you could create your own Witcher back in the golden age of witches, when all the schools were at the height of their Witcher training. And the same thing would apply there, where you could start at one of the various Witcher schools and learn different. You could visit all the other schools in turn to learn different skills, I imagine, something like that. Where, you know, you could create your own character, and again, that would offer CD Projekt lots of creative options for the overarching story. But I suppose we'd need to see how Cyberpunk fares in terms of how strong the narrative is for a player created character, because that is something I'm a little worried about for Cyberpunk. You know, I've got no indication that the story isn't going to be good. It's just, when you give so much player choice into how your actions affect the story in the world, you know, I imagine some people might play through Cyberpunk and there's just no emotional weight to the story just because they've just gone through a wrecking shop. But, you know, we'll see how they deal with, you know, a player created lead character in V in Cyberpunk, and then if that goes as well as I imagine it will, it's going to be awesome, I imagine, and then this gives viability to a potential player created character sequel for the Witcher series. So guys, what do you think? You know, would you like to see a player created Witcher? I mean, I suppose that would give them issues with gender in this, because there aren't any female witches, but if you give a player created character, they're going to have to make that an option. So, you know, they're going to have to bend the law somewhat for that. Or would they stick to their guns and all your player created witches would have to be men? I can just picture the headlines on Kotaku already. It really would be, you know, a blank slate that CD Projekt would have if they went back to before Geralt's time, or they moved on and re-established the Witcher schools. Okay, so the other option for a sequel that is open to CD Projekt is to create a game with one of the other canon characters that isn't Geralt. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky, I suppose, because, you know, personally, I would only ever want to play as a Witcher. I wouldn't want to have a game where I played as Triss or Yennefer or Ciri. I mean, I know some people have said Ciri would be probably the best option, but I really don't agree with that. I mean, I'm not the biggest Ciri fan. You know, I do like Ciri, but you know, I wouldn't want to play as her for a whole game. You know, she's such a powerful character. They'd have to do some sort of, they'd have to nerf her powers somewhat. You know, in sort of, it'd be a bit like a plot device really, just to bring her powers down. And she isn't really a Witcher. She trained as a Witcher for a little bit, but she didn't go through full training. She didn't have the mutations. For me, I'd want to play as a Witcher in a Witcher game. That is the whole point really. I wouldn't want to play as the Empress of Nilfgaard or as a, you know, as a powerful sorceress. I think you need to play as a Witcher. So that would leave us with, in terms of the Wolf School Witches, that would leave us with Eskel and Lambert, and it would also leave us, I've seen a lot of people suggest, you know, in comment sections and stuff, is playing as young Vesemir. So those are all options. You could play as young Lambert, you could play as young Eskel as well. So those are options for prequels. I mean, one thing that they could do is, you know, I know The Witcher 3 was a big open world game, but one option they do have is to create possibly a series of smaller games. So if you remember when Uncharted 4 came out, there was a spin-off where you played as, I think, was it Chloe her name was, anyway, a character from the second Uncharted game, and that was a standalone game. It was a reduced price point, but it was still a really good experience, and it was about, I'm trying to think, maybe it was about 10 hours. So maybe if they had some spin-off games that were that were still in a sort of open world, maybe you'd have a map the size of Toussaint, because Toussaint was about 20 to 30 hours as an expansion. So maybe we could have a side story playing as Eskel or Lambert as they journeyed to Kavir or to Zerrikania or anywhere really, maybe down into Nilfgaard, to Nazaire, maybe to all these other places they could go to, where you could have this sort of slightly smaller map, a map the size of Toussaint, which is not small by most game standards, but you know what I mean, like a 20 to 30 hour experience maybe, where we got to play as Eskel or Lambert or Vesemir in the past. Or, you know, I can't imagine CD Projekt would want to do a full-sized, you know, big 100-hour experience as one of these other characters. But maybe young Vesemir, that would be interesting. I wouldn't really want to play as a non-Witcher character, and that would include Ciri for me. I don't regard her as a Witcher. She is in a way, but she's not in other ways. You know, she's a child of the Elder Blood first, and a Witcher second, I would say. So, you know, in terms of other Witcher characters, it's difficult to sort of, I mean, you're not going to do a game as Letho, really, you know. So they could maybe, the other option would be is that they make a whole new game with a new Witcher, but they write a new specific Witcher. But that, you know, that would, you know, I imagine they'd just do a player created character for that. But, you know, if I imagine going back in time would suit these a bit more. I keep going back and forth between whether a sequel or a prequel would be best. But, you know, you maybe want to go back to the golden age of Witchers to experience a proper Witcher story, and that might suit it best. You're going to need to re-establish the Witchering trade in some way to do a sequel, you know, so they'd need to find a way around that. Right guys, so, you know, which characters would you maybe like to play as from the series? Would you want to play as Ciri? I wouldn't really want to play as her, but I know a lot of other people would. Would you want to play as a sorceress, or do you think you need to stick to being a sword-wielding Witcher? I mean, you know, I'd quite like to play as Lambert. You know, Lambert's one of the, you know, he's got a bit of a dark sense of humour. He's quite funny. He's hinted at his troubled past, about how his father got rid of him and all that emotional past. It might be quite interesting to go back to play as a young Lambert or a young Eskel. Maybe we could even do quests with Geralt if we went back to play as them back in the day. But I know one thing that I've seen a lot of people suggest is playing as young Vesemir. That would be really interesting. And you know, we all have such a strong connection to Vesemir after playing through the game and watching his sacrifice and learning from his mistakes and everything. Oh, getting a bit emotional talking about Papa Vesemir, but you know, maybe that would be really interesting going back. And we've had hints at his past before. You know, I've forgotten her name now, but the lady in the auction house who fell in love with Vesemir when they were younger in Oxenfurt. So that would be of interest. But like I said, it would be interesting if they would play with the format a bit. You know, the idea that they don't necessarily have to do 100 to 150 hour game. If they were going to do one of these side characters, they could do like a 20 to 40 hour game that was similar to the Blood and Wine expansion in scope, where we get to play as one of the other witches. Maybe that would be an interesting way for them to revisit the world and create several games, really. I mean, there could be a Witcher series where, you know, one game we get to play as Eskel, one game we get to play as Lambert, in one game we get to play as young Vesemir, or maybe we get to play as Letho in a sequel. I mean, who knows? But a shorter experience. You know, I'm open to whatever they want to do in this world. You know, if they want to create some other experiences, and then they could make a big game as Geralt, but then they could have these other slightly shorter games with the other characters. Let me know what you think. Who would you like to play? So the other thing I just wanted to talk about was, you know, where could they go? Because they've really only scratched the surface in terms of this map. I mean, look at this map. They've got so many other places to go, really. And, you know, they've explored some sort of more, like, less spectacular locations, you know, like Velen, you know, the downtrodden swamps of war-torn Velen, you know, and they had other more spectacular options to go to. I mean, I know for me personally, I'd love to go to Kavir. You know, the really prosperous northern nations up in the cold mountains, you know, where Triss said she wanted to retire. I'd love to visit Kavir with its, you know, it's supposed to have very Venetian architecture. So I'd love to visit Kavir. I'd love to visit Dol B'Thana where the elves are. I'd love to visit Zerrikania in the wild jungles, where all the warrior women are, and the interesting ways of fighting. Maybe we could visit Ophir. Maybe we could go down to the hot south, right in the middle of Nilfgaard, and visit Ebbing and Nazaire and all these other kingdoms. Maybe we could go to Sintra. Maybe we could see where Ciri and her lineage are from in Sintra. You know, they have so many possibilities here on this map. I mean, just look around this map here. They've only really scratched the surface on the continent. I mean, they could even, because I know it's not Earth, obviously, but the way the people are spread out, it's sort of based around sort of the ethnic spread is sort of similar to Earth. You know, Ophiri off to the east, they're a lot like people from the Middle East. You know, their complexion, their facial structures, their hair, the way they talk. You know, and that's off to the east. Maybe there could be a place down further to the south, similar to Africa, or somewhere to the west, similar to the jungles of South America. Maybe there could be something similar to that, where they could create their own new nations and new people, and they could, you know, and that could introduce a whole variety of different types of people in the cast. So, you know, where would you want to go? You know, let me know. I mean, there's so many different possibilities. I'd definitely like to see them, you know, visit a more dwarven or elvish location. Maybe go to Mahakam, or like I said, go to Dol B'Thana, the sort of the elven sanctuary where all the elves moved after they were sort of kicked out of all the human cities. So, you know, they've got so many different locations open to them. I just really want them to revisit this world. Alright guys, so, you know, let me know what you think. Where would you want to go? What sort of sequel would you want? Would you really want to play as Geralt, or would you want to play as your own character? Would you want to play as one of the other characters from the world? Would you want to play as Ciri? I mean, you know, she is all powerful, but maybe she has too many responsibilities. I mean, who would you like to play other than Geralt? Do you want to see them, you know, carry on their timeline, move forward in time, or would you like to see them go back to the golden age of witches, maybe go back 100 years in time before
all of these events and before all the Witcher schools have been disbanded, you know, which way would you like to see them go? You know, the main reason I made this video is because I really want to discuss with people what they'd like to see from a sequel to, you know, one of the best games of all time. And the last thing I just want to mention is, you know, CD Projekt are in a bit of a funny situation here, because it is a trilogy that they've concluded, but for the majority of players who've come in to experience The Witcher 3, they've not experienced the other games, and their first entry into, for most people really who've played the game, is The Witcher 3. You know, that's not the case for me. I'd read most of the books before I played The Witcher 3, and I was already well invested in the world, but the other games don't have the kind of polish, the kind of scope that The Witcher 3 has. So they're in a bit of a weird position where it's the end of a trilogy, but it almost feels like the start of one in a way. It's sort of a weird situation, because they were a developing studio that weren't attached to a big developer with a big budget. So the other games, while they still have good writing and great characters and everything, it doesn't have the same scope as The Witcher 3. So The Witcher 3 feels like it's the start of something when it's actually the end of something. So I really feel like they need to revisit it. Like I said, they could mess with the format a little bit. They could do some shorter spin-off games, like I said before, maybe like a 30-hour experience that's, you know, similar in nature to Blood and Wine. You know, so that they wouldn't have to spend another 7 years developing the game or something like that. And they could get some Witcher games out in a bit of a tighter time frame. So yeah, I really hope that they're not done with this universe, with this world. You know, I hope they don't finish it as a trilogy. I'd like them to turn it into an odyssey. You know, I would want more Geralt. You know, I would enjoy a player-created Witcher game, but I would want to play as Geralt. You know, whether it was a sequel or a prequel, I would always, you know, shut up and take my money. I would play as Geralt again. I'd love to see them do some spin-off games. I'd love to learn more about Eskel, Lambert, and Vesemir. You know, I know they've already done a bit of spin-off with the Witcher Tales, but that was a point and click. It wasn't about a Witcher. It was about, you know, it was about armies and stuff. And, you know, I'd like them to get back to being a Witcher. That is what I like. I like the adventuring. I don't necessarily like the whole saving the world thing that they had with Ciri. I like the whole adventuring side, going from town to town, solving a mystery, getting in a bit of trouble, and having a strong ale at the pub afterwards with your friends, joking about all the crazy times you've just been through. That's kind of what I like about the Witcher games. It's just that adventuring nature of them. And I really hope CD Projekt will revisit it. I know they've said that they've been a bit burnt out with it, but I think that there is so much variety that they could explore in the different locales, that there's plenty of diversity for them to do here. It's not just going to be more of the same. They can really make something even more special in the future. Okay guys, so I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think. I really want to discuss, you know, what you'd like to see in a potential sequel. So, you know, maybe leave a thumbs up on the video if you've enjoyed it. Think about subscribing if you want to see more from me. I do mostly Let's Play content, but I'll occasionally do videos like this, particularly about The Witcher, because, you know, this stuff's been on my mind for a long time. So think about subscribing if you want to join Clan Drummond, if you want to see more. Just remember, everybody, never trust an on-crate. I'll see you next time.